Preface. The treasures of ancient high art lately unearthed at Luxor have excited the admiring interest of a breathless world, and have awakened more vividly than before a sense of the vast antiquity of the so-called modern civilization, as it existed over 3,000 years ago in far-off ancient Egypt and Syria Phoenicia. Keener and more personal interest, therefore, should naturally be felt by us in the long-lost history and civilization of our own ancestors in ancient Britain of about that period, as they are now disclosed to have been a branch of the same great ruling race to which belonged, as we shall see, the sun-worshipping Akhenaten, the predecessor and father-in-law of Tutankhamen, and authors of the naturalistic New Egyptian art the Syro-Phoenicians. That long-lost origin and early history of our ancestors, the Britons, Scots, and Anglo-Saxons, in the prehistoric and pre-Roman periods, back to about 3000 BC, are now recovered to a great extent in the present work, by means of newly discovered historical evidence. And so far from these ancestral Britons having been mere if-painted savages roaming wild in the woods, as we are imaginatively told in most of the modern history books, they are now on the contrary disclosed by the newly found historical facts to have been from the very first grounding of their galley keels upon old Albion's shores, over a millennium and a half of years before the Christian era, a highly civilized and literate race, pioneers of civilization, and a branch of the famous Phoenicians. In the course of my researches into the fascinating problem of the lost origin of the Aryans, the fair, long-headed North European race, the traditional ancestors of our forebears, of the Brito-Scandinavian race who gave to Europe in prehistoric time its higher civilization and civilized languages. V. Preface. Researches to which I have devoted the greater part of my life, and my entire time for the past 16 years I ascertained that the Phoenicians were Aryans in race. That is to say, they were of the fair and long-headed civilizing northern race, the reality of whose existence was conclusively confirmed and established by Huxley, who proved that there was and is an Aryan race, that is to say, the characteristic modes of speech, termed Aryan, were developed among the blonde Longheads alone, however much some of them may have been modified by the importation of non-Aryan elements. The Aryan question in 19th century, 1890. 766. Thus the daring Phoenician pioneer mariners who, with splendid courage, in their small winged galleys, first explored the wide seas and confines of the unknown ancient world, and of whose great contributions to the civilization of Greece and Rome classic writers speak in glowing terms, were, I found by indisputable inscriptional and other evidence, not Semites as hitherto supposed, but were Aryans in race, speech, and script. They were besides disclosed to patrilineal blood ancestors of the Britons and Scots properly so called, that is, as opposed to the aboriginal dark non-Aryan people of Albion, Caledonia, and Hibernia, the dusky small-statured Picts and kindred Iberian tribes. This discovery, of far-reaching effect upon the history of European civilization, and of Britain in particular, was announced in a summary of some of the results of my researches on Aryan origins in the Asiatic Review for 1917, pages 197f. And it is now strikingly confirmed and established by the discovery of hitherto undeciphered Phoenician and Sumerian inscriptions in Britain, the first to be recorded in Britain, and by a mass of associated historical evidence from a great variety of original sources, including hitherto uninterpreted pre-Roman Britain coins and contemporary inscriptions, most of which is now published for the first time. In one of these inscriptions, a bilingual Phoenician inscription in Scotland of about 400 BC, now deciphered and translated for the first time, its author, in dedicating a votive monument to the sun god Bel, calls himself by all three titles: Phoenician, Briton and Scot, and Preface. Records his personal name and native town in Cilicia, which is a well-known ancient city-port and famous seat of sun worship in Asia Minor. This British Phoenician prince from Cilicia is, moreover, disclosed in his own inscription in Scotland to be the actual historical original of the traditional Part Olon, king of the Scots, who, according to the ancient British chronicles of Geoffrey and Nennius and the legends of the Irish Scots, came with a fleet of colonists from the Mediterranean and arrived in Erin, after having cruised round the Orkneys, not far distant from the site where this Phoenician monument stands, and colonized and civilized Ireland, about 4 centuries before the Roman occupation of Britain. And he is actually called in this inscription Part Olon by a fuller early form of that name. This uniquely important British Phoenician inscription, whilst incidentally extending back the existence of the Scots in Scotland for over 8 centuries beyond the period hitherto known for them to our modern historians, and disclosing their Phoenician origin, at the same time rehabilitates the genuineness of the traditional indigenous British chronicles as preserved. Byg Freofmon Mouthandninius. These chronicles, although formerly accorded universal credence in Britain and on the continent up till about a century ago, have been arbitrarily jettisoned aside by modern writers on early British history, obsessed with exaggerated notions of the Roman influence on Britain, as mere fables. But the genuineness of these traditional chronicles, thus conclusively established for the period about 400 BC, is also now confirmed in a great variety of details for other of these traditional events in the pre-Roman period of Britain. This ascertained agreement of the traditional British chronicles with leading ascertained facts of pre-Roman British history wherever it can be tested, presumes a similarly genuine character also for the leading events in the earlier tradition. This begins with the arrival of King Brutus the Trojan and his Briton colonists with their wives and families in a great fleet from the Mediterranean about II03 BC, and his occupation, colonization, and civilization. 8. Preface. Of Albion, which he then is recorded to have called after himself and his Trojan Briton followers Britain or land of the Brits, after dispossessing a still earlier colony of kindred Britons in Albion. All the more so is this pre-Roman British tradition with its complete king lists and chronicles probably genuine, as the ancient Britons, properly so called, are now found to have been accustomed to the use of writing from the earliest period of their first arrival in Albion or Britain. And the cherished old British tradition that Brutus the Trojan and his Britons hailed from the Mediterranean coast of Asia Minor is in agreement with the fact that King Part Olon the Briton actually records his native land as being also on the Mediterranean coast of Asia Minor. And this tradition is now confirmed by the discovery that many of the prehistoric gravings and inscriptions on the rocks and monoliths in Britain are of the Trojan type. Fully to appreciate the historical significance of these long undeciphered Phoenician and Sumerian inscriptions in Britain, and their associated evidence, it is necessary to have some general acquaintance with the results of my researches into the racial origin and previously unknown early history and world activities of the Phoenicians for a period of over 2,000 years beyond that hitherto known to our historians. I, therefore, give in the introductory chapter a brief summary of the manner in which I was led to discover that the Phoenicians were Aryan in race, speech, and script, and were of vast antiquity, dating back from the testimony of their own still existing inscribed monuments to about 300 BC. My new historical keys to the origin and prehistoric activities of the Phoenicians in early Europe disclose these virile ancestral pioneers of the higher civilization as no mere dead figures in a buried past, but instinct with life and human interests, adventurously exploring and exploiting the commercial possibilities of the various regions along the unknown seas of the Old World, and indicating to us at the present day the paths which led to the propagation and progress of the higher civilization over the world. Starting from the solid new ground of the positive, concrete, historical inscriptions, we are led by the clues thus gained to Preface. Fresh clues which open up for us, as we proceed, new and unsuspected avenues of evidence, disclosing rich mines of untapped historical material, written and unwritten. These clues lead us from Britain back to the Phoenician and Hittite homeland of the Aryan Phoenician Britons in Syria, Phoenicia, and Asia Minor of St. George of Cappadocia, and England, and there offer us the solutions to most of the long outstanding problems in regard to the origin of the ancient Britons and the source and meaning of our ancestral British folklore, national emblems, and patron saints. In this way we gain not only a fairly intimate knowledge of the personalities of the early Aryan Phoenicians who, as the ancestral Britons and Scots, colonized and civilized Britain, and the historical reasons for their various waves of migration hither with wholesale transplantation of their cults, institutions, and names on British soil. We gain at the same time a considerable new insight into the remoter origin and racial character of the pre-Briton, non-Aryan Aborigines of the British Isles in the Stone Age and their relation to the Picts and Celts, which unravels to a great extent the hopeless tangle in which the question of the aboriginal races in Britain has hitherto become involved. In thus enlarging, not inconsiderably, the boundaries of Clio's domain in Britain, we are led into several provinces not hitherto suspected of connection with Britain, though the relationship now becomes obvious. This wider outlook on the parent land, as well as its colony in Britain and their intercommunications, reflects fresh light on both the ancient Britons and on their parent Phoenicians. Amongst the great variety of historical effects thus elicited by this new light may be mentioned the following. Archaeologically are disclosed the racial character, original homeland, and approximate dates of our ancestral erectors of the prehistoric stone circles in the British Isles with the motive of these monuments, also the erectors of the prehistoric stone cists and long barrow graves of the late Stone Age. The discovery of the key to the script of the prehistoric cup marks engraved upon the rocks and monoliths unlocks the hitherto sealed messages of these prehistoric. Preface. Literary records of our ancestors, and gives us a vivid picture of the exalted ideals which already ruled their lives in those far distant days. Relatively fixed data are obtained for the much conjectured beginning of the Bronze Age in Britain, and of the race who introduced it and manufactured the early bronze weapons, implements and trinkets which are unearthed from time to time, and hitherto supposed to be 11. Celtic. The racial character and original homeland of the pre-Aryan Aborigines of the British Isles in the Stone Age also become evident. And we discover that the hitherto inexplicable unity in the essentials of all the ancient civilizations is owing to the original unity of the higher civilization, and its diffusion throughout the world by its originators, the ruling race of Aryans, and especially by their sea-going branch, the Phoenicians. Historically, besides recovering the approximate dates of the chief waves of Aryan Briton invasions, and the political causes apparently leading to these invasions, we recover and establish the historicity, names, achievements, and dates of a great number of the chief kings and heroes of the ancient Britons in what has hitherto been considered 11. The prehistoric period. Amongst other results is the interpretation of the unexplained legends and the wholly unknown origin and meaning of the symbols stamped upon the very numerous coins of the ancient Britons in the pre-Roman period, and now disclosed for the first time. In British national patron saints and emblems of Phoenician origin are now found to be St. George of Cappadocia and England and his dragon legend and his red cross, also the crosses of St. Andrew and St. Patrick, now forming with St. George's the Union Jack and the kindred Scandinavian ensigns, all of which crosses are found to have been carried by the Phoenicians as their sacred standards of victory and imported and transplanted by them in the remote past onto British soil. Britannia also is discovered to have been 11. Evolved by the ancient seagoing Phoenicians as their patronymic tutelary goddess, and under the same name and with substantially the same form of representation as the British. 11. Britannia. And the Phoenician origin and hitherto unknown. Preface. Meaning of the unicorn and lion emblems in British heraldry are now disclosed for the first time. Linguistically, we now find that the English, Scottish, Irish, Gaelic, Cymric, Gothic and Anglo-Saxon languages and their script, and the whole family of the so-called Aryan languages with their written letters, are derived from the Aryan Phoenician language and script through their parent, the Hittite or Sumerian, and that about 50% of the commonest words in use in the our English language today are discovered to be Sumerian, Kymrian, or Hittite in origin, with the same word form, sound and meaning. This fact is freely illustrated in these pages, as critical words occur incidentally as we proceed. And it is found that the English and Doric Scottish dialects preserve the original RR Aryan or Sumerian form of words more faithfully than either the Sanskrit or Greek. The Phoenician origin of the ancient sacred Ogham script of the pre-Christian monarch Ments in the British Isles is also disclosed. In religion, it is now found that the exalted religion of the Aryan Phoenicians, the so-called RR sun worship, with its lofty ethics and belief in a future life with resurrection from the dead, was widely prevalent in early Britain down to the Christian era. In this sun worship, as it is usually styled by modern writers, we shall see that, although the earliest Aryans worshipped that luminary itself, they were the first people to imagine the idea of God in heaven, and at an early period evolved the idea of the one universal God, as the Father God, some millenniums before the birth of Abraham, and they symbolized him by the Sunday. They further emblemized the sun as the light of the world by the true cross, in the manner now discovered, and they carved the cross, as the symbol of universal divine victory, upon their sacred seals and standards, and sculptured it upon their monuments from the 4th millennium BC downwards, and invented the swastika with the meaning now disclosed. This now explains for the first time the very numerous crosses and swastikas carved upon the prehistoric stone monuments and pre-Christian stone crosses with their other solar and non-Christian symbols throughout the British Isles. It also now XLL Preface explains the solar wheeled cross, the so-called Celtic cross, and the Red Cross of St. George, the fiery cross of the Scottish clans, the bell fire rites still surviving in the remoter parts of these islands at the summer solstice, and the numerous true crosses with solar symbols stamped upon the ancient Briton coins of the Catti and Cassi kings of the pre-Roman and pre-Christian periods in Britain. Geographically, the topography of the prehistoric distribution of the early Aryan Phoenician settlements throughout ancient Britain is recovered by the incidence of their patronymic and ethnic names in the oldest Aryan place, river, and ethnic names ill relation to the prehistoric stone circles and monuments, before the thick upcrop of later and modern town and village names had submerged or obscured the early Aryan names on the map. The transplantation by the Phoenician colonists of old cherished homeland names from Asia Minor and Phoenician colonies on the Mediterranean is also seen. The Phoenician source and meaning of many of the ancient place, river, and mountain names in Britain, hitherto unknown, or the subject of more or less fantastic conjecture by imaginative etymologists, is disclosed. And a somewhat clearer view is, perhaps, gained of the line of Phoenician seaports, trading stations, and ports of call along the Mediterranean and out beyond the Pillars of Hercules in the prehistoric period. In economics and science, the Hitto-Phoenician Aryan origin of our ordered agricultural and industrial life becomes evident. And the old British tradition is confirmed that London was built as the commercial capital several centuries before the foundation of Rome. In art, a like origin is disclosed for many of the motives. In our modern decorative art, the religious solar meaning of the key patterns and spiral designs is elicited for the first time, and the art displayed by the ancient Britons in the pre-Roman period is found to be based upon Hitto-Phoenician models, and to be of a much higher standard than in the Anglo-Saxon and medieval period in Britain. Politically, the newly discovered racial link, uniting the Western Britons or Britons with the Eastern Britons. Preface 13. 9 are Britons, of India still called the land of the Britons through the blood kinship with the ruling chiefs of India now revealed and established, should favourably determine the latter, in these days of Indian unrest, to remain within the fellowship of the British Commonwealth, which is now shown to have retained the real elements of the old progressive ancestral Bharat civilization in a much purer form than the Indian branch. And the intimate kinship of the Britons and British, properly so called, with the Norse the joint preservers of the ancestral Gothic epics, the Eddas is now disclosed to be much closer and much more ancient than has hitherto been suspected, and long before the Viking Age. Classic legend and myth is to some extent rehabilitated by finding that some of the great heroes and demigods of Homer had a historical human origin in the personalities and achievements of famous early Aryan and Bharat kings, whose actual dates are now recovered. The psychologist and eugenist may probably find a somewhat clearer standpoint for observing the effect of the mixing of racial elements in the composite British nation, and in regard to the question of the racial element making for real progress in the complex conditions of our modern national life. Amongst the many minor effects of the discovery of the Aryan racial character of the Phoenicians and their merchant princes now disclosed, it would appear that the beautiful painting by Lord Leighton which adorns the walls of the Royal Exchange in London, portraying the opening of the trade era in Britain, now requires an exchange of complexions between the Aborigines of Albion and the Phoenician merchants, as well as some slight nasal readjustment in the latter to the Aryan type. In thus opening up for us lost vistas of history adown the ages, and lifting considerably higher than before the dense veil that hung so long over the origin and ancestry of the composite races now forming the British nation, the new-found historical evidence suggests that the modern Aryan Britons, or British, more fully than the other descendants. 14 Preface of the Phoenicians, have inherited the seafaring aptitudes and adventurous spirit of that foremost race of the ancient world, and that the maritime supremacy of Britain, under her Phoenician tutelary Britannia, has been mainly kept alive by the lineal blood descendants of these Aryan Phoenician ancestors of the Britons and the Scots and Anglo-Saxons. In traversing such wide and varied fields of research in so many different specialized departments of culture and civilization, wherein a great mass of the new uncoordinated knowledge, laboriously unearthed by countless modern archaeologists working in separate watertight compartments, now receives a new orientation, it is scarcely possible that one individual, however careful, in such a pioneer exploration for the path of truth along this vastly complex problem, can escape falling into errors in some details. But no pains have been spared to minimize such possibilities. And it is believed that such errors of commission, if they do occur, are relatively few and immaterial, and do not at all affect the main conclusions reached, which are so clearly established by the mass of cumulative historical evidence. The long delay in publishing these discoveries, which were mostly made many years ago, has been owing to the vast scope of this exploration over so many wide fields, with the reorientation of much of the mass of knowledge unearthed by countless archaeologists working in specialized but isolated and uncoordinated departments. To this has been added the necessity for my acquiring a working knowledge of the ancient scripts and languages in which the original ancient inscriptions and records were written, in order to revise at first hand the spelling of the proper names in the original records in the cuneiform and its parent the Sumerian hieroglyphic script, also in the Akkadian, Hittite, HIERO11, Glyph Egyptian, Cretan, Cyprian, Iberian, Runic Gothic, Ogham, and the so-called Phoenician Semitic, and its allied Aramaic and Hebrew scripts, in addition to the Indian Pali and Sanskrit. This has entailed the spending of many additional years in strenuous toil for the necessary equipment for this pioneer exploration from the Aryan standpoint, as disclosed by my new historical keys found embedded in the Preface. 15. Indian Sanskrit Vedas and Epics. And it has been supplemented by actual visitation of some of the chief sites in the ancient homeland of the Phoenicians and Hitto-Sumerians in Mesopotamia and Syria Phoenicia. It is for the unbiased reader now to judge whether these many years of intensive study are justified by their results. Some of the outstanding historical results of these discoveries are indicated in the concluding chapter. And here I gratefully acknowledge the great obligations I owe to my friend Dr. Ile Bums Muirhead, M.A., who from first to last has favored me with his helpful candid criticism on many of the details of the discoveries, with not a few suggestive comments, some of which I have gladly incorporated in these pages, and whose unflagging interest in the progress of the work has been a constant source of encouragement. I am also indebted to the courtesy of the several authorities mentioned in the text, for replying to my inquiries and permitting the use of a few of the illustrations. A list of the chief authorities and publications referred to is given at the end of the work. L. A. WADDELL. January, 1924. Fig. A Sunhorse of Phoenician Archangel Michael, and his cross-vanquishing dragon, inscribed DJA05 in Sumerian, with equivalent 5 cup marks. From Hittite seal of about .0008.c, altar Delaport, DEA Pi. 89. B. Fig. B. Ancient Britain coin of RST or ZND CENT BC of same scene, also inscribed DJAS. After. Evans, EEB, PL, 6. 4. The cross, goat, and 5 U-cup marks of Michael appear in others of these coins. Thus see the S. Cups behind horse on the Britain coin on back of cover, and figs 43a, 61. 6465, NC. Warning, empty page. Contents. Page. Preface v15. Chap. I. The Phoenicians discovered to be Aryans in race and the ancestors of the Britons. Scots and Anglo-Saxons Is. 2. The undeciphered PH and LTENICIAN inscriptions of about 400 BC in Britain and site of monument. 16 to 20. 3. The inscriptions on Newton stone and previous feudal attempts at decipherment 21 to 25. 4. Decipherment and translation of the PH and LTENICIAN inscriptions. Disclosing monument to BEA votive fire cross to the sun god Bel by a Phoenician Hittite. Briton, and the script and language Aryan Phoenician or Early Briton 26 to 32. 5. Date of Newton stone inscriptions about 400 BC. Disclosing special features of Aryan Phoenician script, also Agam as sacred sun cult script of the Hittites, Early Britons, and Scots. 33 to 37. 6. Personal, ethnic, and geographic Phoenician names and titles in Newton stone inscriptions and their historic significance. Disclosing also Phoenician source of the Cassi tight leaf ancient Britain kings and their coins 38 to 51. 17. 18. Contents. Chap page. 7. Phoenician tribal title of Barat or Brihat and its source of names Briton, Britan and Britanla. Disclosing Aryan Phoenician origin of the tutelary Britannia and of her form and emblems in art. 52 to 66. 8. Phoenician Barat or Brit author of Newton stone inscriptions disclosed as historical original of Part Olon, king of the Scots and traditional civilizer of Ireland about 400 RC. Disclosing Hitto-Phoenician origin of clan title Ualana or Velayunis or W. Alon of Britain kings Cassi Velanus or Cadwallon, NC, and of Uchlani title of Cassi ruling Britons. 67 to 80. 9. Local survival of Partolon's name in the district of his monument. Disclosing Phoenician origin of names Barthol, Bartle, Bartholomew, and Brud title of the kings of the Picts 8I-90. 10. Partolon's invasion of Ireland about 400 BC discovers the first peopling of Ireland and Albion in the Stone Age by matriarchist Van or Fen dwarfs, disclosing Van or Feen origin of Irish Aborigines and of their serpent worship, Saint Brigid, and matrilinear customs of Irish and Pic. 9 II 10. 2. Who were the Picts? Disclosing their non-Aryan racial nature and affinity with matriarchist Van, Wan, or Feen dwarfs and as the Aborigines of Britain in Stone Age 3I-26. Contents. Chap page. 12. Who were Tile Celts properly so called? Disclosing identity of early British Celts or Celts and Culdees with the Caldus of Van and the Picts. 127 to 141. 13. Coming of the Britons or Aryan Britoff and Ltenicians under King Brutus the Trojan to Albion about Li03 RC. 142 to 167. 14. Aryanizing civilization of Picts and Celts by Brutus and his Brito PH and Ltenician Goths. About Lioo RC. Disclosing Phoenician origin of Celtic, Cymric, Gothic and English languages, and founding of London and Bronze Age 168 to 187. Is. PH and Ltenician penetration of Britain attested by Barat patronym in Old Place in. Ethnic names. Disclosing also Sumero-Phoenician sources of Cumber, Cymer and Summer ethnic names 188 to 199. 16. Caddy, Keith, Gad, and Cassie titles in Old Ethnic and Place names evidencing PH and Ltenician penetration of Britain in its Isles. Confirming Hitto-Phoenician origin of Caddy and Cassie coins of pre-Roman Britain 200 to 215. 17. Prehistoric stone circles in Britain disclosed as solar observatories erected by Morite Brito PH and Ltenicians and their date. Disclosing method of sighting the circles 216 to 235. 18. Prehistoric cup marking on circles, rocks, etc. in Britain, and circles on ancient Briton coins and monuments as Invoca. Contents. Chap page. Nods to sun god in Sumerian circle script by early Hitto-Phoenicians. Disclosing decipherment and translations of prehistoric Briton inscriptions by identical cup marks on Hitto-Sumerian seals and Trojan amulets with explanatory Sumer script, and Hitto-Sumer origin of god names Yahweh or Jove, Indra, if Indri I Thor of Goths, Saint Andrew, earth goddess if Maya or May, if three fates or sibyls etc., and of English names and signs of numerals. 236 to 261. 19 Sun worship and bell fire rites in early Britain derived from the Phoenicians. Disclosing Phoenician origin of solar emblems on pre-Christian monuments in Britain, on pre-Roman Britain coins, and of diesel or sunwise direction in horseshoe for luck, etc. 0 On TB Baptist as Aryan sun fire priest. 262 to 288. 20 Sun cross of Hitto-Phoenicians is origin of pre-Christian cross on Britain coins and monuments and of Celtic and true cross in Christianity. Disclosing Catti, Hittite Argothic origin of Celtic or runic cross, fiery cross, red cross off St. George, swastikon spectacles, crosses on early Britain coins, etc., an introduction of true cross into Christianity by the Goths, and ancient Brito-Gothic hymns to the sun 289 to 314. 21 St. Andrew as patron saint with his cross incorporates Hitto-Sumerian father god Indra, or Gothic Indri Thor and his hammer introduced into early Britain by Gothic Phoenicians. Disclosing pre-Christian worship of Andrew in early Britain and Hittite origin of crosses. XXI. Contents. Chap page. On Union Jack and Scandinavian ensigns, unicorn and Cymric goat as sacred goat Oj and Dara, coat as Rebus IV and Lt Goth and St. Andrew as an Aryan Phamician 315 to 337. 22 Corn spirit Tas Meikle or F Ub of Hitto-Sumers is Tassio of early Britain coins and prehistoric inscriptions, Thai Gothic god of Tuesday Day, and Michael the Archangel, introduced by Phoenicians, disclosing his identity with Phoenician archangel Tiaz, Tax, Das Hap Meikle, and Thyza, Miklai of Goths, Daxa of Vedas, and widespread worship in early Britain. Phoenician origin of Dionysus and Michaelmas harvest festival and of those. Y. Enfu. 23 Aryan Phoenician racial element in the mixed race of the British Isles and its effect on the progress of British civilization 363 to 378. 24 Historical effects of the discoveries. Appendices. Page 1 Chronological list of early Britain kings, from Brutus about II03 BC to Roman period, compiled from early British chronicles of Geoffrey of Monmouth and supplemented by records of Dr. Powell, etc., and confirmed by testimony of Britain coins, etc. 385 to 393. XXII Contents. Page 2 Partolon's identity with Cathluin, first traditional king of the Picts in Scotland 394 to 396. 3 Catti place and ethnic names evidencing PH and LTENICIAN penetration I. The home counties, Midlands, north of England, Ireland, and Scotland 479 to 403. 4 Brutus the Trojan as the Homeric hero Pirithous 404 to 406. 5 Founding of London as New Troy, Trinovant, by King Brutus about IROO BC 4°7-410. 6 Moor or Amorite cup marked inscriptio. With Sumerian script O. Tomb of Aryan Sun Priestess, of about 4000 RC, from Smyrna, supplying a key to cup marked. Script I. Briti-42412. 7 The Amorite Phoenician tin mines of Cassiterides. In Cornwall. Referred to by Sargon I of Akkad, about 2750 BC, and Captura or Kaftar as Abdera in Spain 413 to 415. Abbreviations for chief references. I. Dex. List of illustrations. Plate 1. Aryan Phoenician inscriptions on Newton stone of Part Olon, king of the Scots about 400 BC, calling himself Briton, Hittite, and Phoenician. From author's photographs. A. Face. B. Semi-profile. C. Profile. Frontispiece. Figures in text. Fig. Page. A sunhorse of Phoenician archangel Dasab Michael, and his cross, vanquishing TB dragon, inscribed in Sumerian Dja5, with his 5 cup marks. From Hittite sacred seal of about 2000 BC, after Delaport, 15. B2 ancient Briton coins of RST or ZNDCENT BC of same scene also inscribed DJAS, after Bale and J. Evans, 15. Bel, the god of the sun and father god of the Phoenicians. From a Phoenician stele of about 4th century BC, after Rena, 2. 2 swastika sun crosses on dress of Phoenician sun priestess carrying sacred fire. After Disesnola, 3. 3 Caddy Briton coin of pre-Roman Britain of about 2nd century BC, with sun and cross symbols. After B post. 6. 4 early Catti or Hittites in their rock sculptures about 2000 BC, after Peru and Guillaume, 7. 5 Phoenician coin of Carthage inscribed Barat. After Duru, 9. 5 A Britain prehistoric monument to Bell at Craignarget, Wigtonshire. With Hitto-Phoenician sun crosses, etc., after Procsoc Antiquaries, Scotland. 15. 5B Prehistoric Britain monument to Bell at Logie in Don Valley, near Newton Stone, with Hitto-Phoenician inscription and solar symbols. After Stuart. 20. 6 Aryan Phoenician inscription on Newton Stone 29. 7 Ogham version of Newton Stone inscription as now deciphered and read. 30. 8 Oghamoid inscription from Hittite hieroglyphs, on the Lion of Marash, after Wright. 36. 9 Phoenician inscription on early Britain coins found near Selsey. After J. Evans, 43. 10 Selekian Gothic king worshipping sun god. From bas-reliefs in Temple of Antiochus I. Of Commagene, 63 to 34 BC, after Cumont. 46. 11 Cassie coin of early Britain, inscribed Ka with sun horse. After post, 48. 12 Cassis of early Babylonia ploughing and sowing under the sign of TB cross. From Cassie official seal of about 1350 BC, after Clay, 49. I2A. Cassie sun cross on prehistoric monument with cup marks at Sininus, Wigtonshire. After Procsoc Antiquaries, Scotland, 5I. 13 Phoenician patronymic titles of Iparit and Prudi or Prudi on Phoenician tombstones in Sardinia 53. XXIII. XXIV contents. Fig. Page. 14 coins of Phoenician barats of Lycaonia of 3rd CENT AD disclosing their tutelary goddess Barity as Britannia. After W. M. Ramsay, 55. 15 Britannia on early Roman coins in Britain. After Ackerman, 56. 16 Phoenician coin of Barity or Britannia from Sidon, after Hill, 57. 17 Britannia tutelary of Phoenicians in Egypt as Bai-Irthi, the mother of the waters, Nut or Naad, after Budge, 60. 18 Egyptian hieroglyphs for goddess Bai-Irthi of Phoenician sailors. 62. 19 Britain lady of Cat Hualong clan, wife of Barats, Assyrio-Phoenician. From sculpture of about n century AD at South Shields. 73. 20 A prehistoric matriarch of the Vans, of the Stone Age. From a Hittite rock sculpture near Smyrna. After Martin, 93. 21 Van or Biana, ancient capital of matriarch Semiramis, and the children of Chaldas on flanks of Ararat. After Bishop, 98. 21 A Sun Eagle triumphs over Serpent of Death, from pre-Christian cross at Mortlock, Banff. After Stuart, LLO. 22 3 main racial head types in Europe -135. 23 Hito-Phoenician war chariot as source of Briton war chariots. After Rossellini. 145. 24 Trojan solar shrine at Brutus birth province, Latium, with identical Hittite symbols as in ancient Britain. After Chanter. 149. 25 Phoenician tin port in Cornwall, Lettys, or St. Michael's Mount in Bay of Penzance. After Borlase. 165-5A. Prehistoric Caddy Sun Cross and spiral gravings on Barrow stones. At Tara, capital of ancient Scotia or Erin. After Coffee. 187-5B. Caddy coin inscribed CDO from Gaul, after Post. 215. 26 Phoenician chair of Rythcent BC, with solar scenes as in early Britain monuments and coins. From tomb of Syrian high priest in Egypt. After Ave Gal, 221. 27 Sumerian sighting marks on observation stone of Keswick Stone Circle. 227. 28 Mode of sighting solstice sunrise by observation stone at Keswick Circle 230. 29 Mode of sighting solstice sunrise by observation stone at Stonehenge 230. 30 Prehistoric cup markings on monuments in British Isles, after Simpson, 237. 31 Cup markings on amulet whorls from Troy. From Schliemann. 238. 32 Cup marks on archaic Hito-Sumerian seals and amulets. From Delaport, 239. 33 Circles as diagnostic cipher marks of Sumerian and Chaldee deities, in trial scene of Adam, the son of god La, Lave. Or Jove. From Sumer seal of about 2500 BC, after Ward, 239. 34 Circle numerical notation in early Sumerian, with values 241. 35 Father god La, Elaha or Jove, or Indara, bestowing the life-giving waters. From Sumer seal of about 2450 BC, after Delaport, 245. 36 Dual circles designate two-headed resurrecting Sunday. From Hito-Sumer seals of about 2400 BC, after Delaport, 247. 37 Returning or resurrecting sun entering. Gates of night. From Hittite seals of about 2000 BC, after Ward, 248. 38 Returning or resurrecting sun in prehistoric Irish rock gravings as two cup marks with reversed spirals entering gates of night. Figs after Coffee. 249. Contents XXV. Fig. Page. 39 Pentad circles designate T Asia, the Archangel Michael 250. 40 Archangel T Asia, winged, invoked by Mother, 4 circles, 4 dead, 3 circles. From Hittite seal of about 1500 BC, after Lajard, 250. 41 Phoenician seal reading T as, Archangel. After Adis as Noah, 251. 42 Heptad circles for heaven. After Delaport, 251. 43 Mum, Moor or Amorite archaic tablet of about 4000 BC from grave of Aryan sun priestess in cup mark and Sumerian script, Hoffman tablet, after Barton. 257. 43 Tassio horseman, and horse of the sun, on Britain coins of Rstcent BC with cross and circle, cup, marks. After Post. 261. 44 Sun symbols discs, horse, hawk, etc., on early Britain coins. After J. Evans, 285 Ha. St. John the Baptist with his sun cross scepter or mace. After Murillo, 288. 44B Ancient Britain coin with corn sun cross, Andrew's cross, sun horse, etc., after Post, 289. 45 Twin fire sticks crossed in fire production, as used in modern India. After Hof, 292. 46 Sun crosses, Hitto-Sumcrian, Phoenician, Cassi and Trojan, plain, rayed and decorated, on seals, amulets, etc. 4000 Iohub.c. 294. 47 Ancient Briton Sun crosses derived from Hitto-Sumerian, Phoenician, Cassi and Trojan sources, on prehistoric pre-Christian monuments and pre-Roman Briton coins. 295. 48 Gyron cross of British heraldry is the Gurin cross of the Hittites. 307. 49 Identity of Cadi or Hittite solar monuments with those of early Britain, Recadso pre-Christian cross. 308. 50 Swastika on Phoenician, or Philistin, coin from Gaza, disclosing origin of Scottish spectacle darts. 310. SI. Swastika of resurrecting sun transfixing the serpent of death on ancient Britain monument at Magle, Forfarshire. After Stuart. 31 52 St. Andrew, patron saint of Goths and Scots, with his cross. After Candler, 314. 53 Indara's X cross on Hitto-Sumerian, Trojan, and Phoenician seals. 316. 54 Andrew's cross on prehistoric monuments in Britain and Ireland and on early Britain coins. 3I7. 55 Indara or Andrew slaying the dragon, from Hittite seal of about 2000 BC, after Ward. 319. 56 Andrews X crosses Indara's bolt or Thor's hammer on ancient Britain monuments. 321. 57 Indara spouting water for benefit of mankind, from Hitto-Sumerian seal of about 2500 BC, after Ward. 324. 58 Unicorn as sole supporter of old royal arms of Scotland, and associated with St. Andrew and his cross. 329. 59 Goats, and deer, as Goths of Indara, protected by cross and Archangel T as, Tashub Meikle, against lion and wolf of death on Hitto-Sumer, Phoenician and Cassi seals. After Ward, etc. 334. 60 Ancient Britain goats, and deer, as Goths of Indara, protected by cross and Archangel Tas or Fascia, Michael, against lions and wolf of death. After Stuart, etc. 335. 60 Ancient Britain Tassio coin inscribed Dia S, after Post. 338. 61 Tassio or Tassif of early Britain coins is corn spirit Tiaz or Tashub. Of Hitto-Sumerians. Coins after J. Evans. 339. XXVI Contents. Fig. Page. 62 Tassio or Tassif as Tashub the Hittite or early Gothic corn spirit. From Archaic Hittite rock sculpture at Ivra in Taurus. After von Luskin and Wilson. 340. 63 Archangel Tas interceding with God Indara for sick man attacked by dragon of death. From Hittite seal of about 2500 BC, after Delaport. 344. 64 Archangel Tas Meikle defending goats, and deer, as Goths with cross and sun emblems on Greco-Phoenician coins. From coins in British Museum, after Hill. 346. 65 Archangel Tas defending goats as Goths. With cross and sun emblems on early Britain coins. From coins after J. Evans and Stukeley. 347. 66 Tiaz as Michael the Archangel, bearing Graid Celtic cross, with corn, sun goose or phoenix on Phoenician coins of Cilicia of 5th century BC, coins in British Museum, after Hill. 349. 67 Tas or Tassio or Saint Michael the Archangel on early Britain pre-Christian coins. Coins after J. Evans. 349. 68 Phoenix sunbird of Tas or Tassio with crosses and sun discs from early Britain cave gravings and coins. After Simpson, Stewart, and J. Evans. 350. 69 Tassio in Egypt as Resafe. After Rena. 353. 70 Fascia, Dios, or tax as Dasa, the Indian Vedic creator god. After Wilkins, 353. 71 Logi stone Agam inscription as now deciphered, disclosing invocation to Bil and his archangel Tachab or Tashub 356. 72 Birdmen on Britain monuments at Inchbrayock and Kirriernur. 4 Far. After Stuart. 362. 73 Early Bronze Age Britain button amulet cross. From Barrowgrave at Rudstone, Yorks. After Greenwell. 378. 74 Ancient Britain Caddy coin of NCENT BC, with sun crosses, sun horse, etc., and legend Ina Ra, hit of Phoenician father god Andra or Andrew. After Evans. 384. 75 Tassio, Hercules, coin of Rican Britain ruling clan. After Post. 385. 76 Archaic Hittite sun horse with sun's disk and wings. From seal at Caesarea in Cappadocia, after Chanter. 410. 77 Pendant Phoenician sun cross held in adoration. From Hittite seal of about 1000 BC, after Lajard, 420. Maps and plans. Sketch map of site of Newton Stone and its neighbourhood in Don Valley. 19 Megalith distribution in England. After W. J. Perry. 217 Survey plan of Keswick Stone Circle, showing orientation of observation stone bearing Sumerian sign marks. After Drive W. D. Anderson. 229 Map of Phoenician Empire in Western Asia, Mediterranean, and NW Europe, showing Kati, or Hittite, Kassi and Barat, and Phoenician place names and Phoenician colonies at end. The Phoenician origin of the Britons, Scots and Anglo-Saxons. The PH and LT Phoenicians discovered to be Aryans in race and the ancestors of the Britons, Scots and Anglo-Saxons. The able Panch Phoenicians setting out to invade the earth, brought the whole world under their sway. Mohabharata Indian epic of the great Bharats. The Brihat Brit on two singers Balad Indra. Indra hath raised the sun on high in heaven. Indra leads us with single sway the Panch Phoenician Brihats leaders of the earth. Ours only, and none others is he. Rig Veda hymn.s. In the preface it is explained that the most suitable starting point to begin unraveling the tangled skein of history for the lost threads of origin of the Britons, Scots, and Anglo-Saxons is from the fresh clues gained on the solid ground of the newly deciphered Phoenician inscriptions in Britain. The chief of these Phoenician inscriptions, and the first to be reported in Britain, is carved upon a hoary old stone of about 400 BC, see frontispiece, dedicated to Bel, the Phoenician god of the sun, see Fig 1. By a votary who 1 MB, BK, I, Chapter 94. Sloka 3738. On Behat as a dialectic Sanskrit variant of the more common Bartu, and the source of Brit or Brit on see later. 3 RV, I, 7. 1-10. 2 Phoenician origin of Britons and Scots. Calls himself therein by all three titles of Phoenician, Briton and Scot, by ancient forms of these titles, and whose personal appearance is presumably illustrated in the nearly contemporary sculpture from his homeland, Fig. IQ, p. 46. In thus preserving for us the name and titles of a prehistoric literate Phoenician king of North Britain upon his own original monument, it at the same time supplies a striking proof of the veracity of the ancient tradition cited in the heading, which the eastern branch of Aryans has. Fig. I Bel. The god of the sun and father god of the Phoenicians. From a Phoenician stele of about the 4th century BC, Altar Rena, Mission de Phoenici Pi. 32, Note rate halo of the Sunday. Fth fully preserved in their famous epic, the Great Bharats, Mahai Bharata, in regard to the prehistoric worldwide civilizing conquests of the Panch or Phoenicians, the greatest ruling clan of the Aryan Bharats, or Brihats, who, we shall find, were the ancestors of the Brits or Britons, our own ancestors. And the amplifying second quotation in the heading, from the early Aryan Psalms, also preserved. Swastika in Brito Ph and Ltenicia Sun Cult 3. By the same eastern branch of the Aryan Barats or Britons, discloses the Phoenician motive for erecting this inscribed monument in early Britain to the god of the sun, with his special symbol of the swastika cross, an emblem embroidered on the dress of the priests and priestesses of the sun, see Fig 2, and figured freely with other solar symbols on Phoenician and early Britain monuments and on pre-Roman Britain coins, as we shall see later. This Brito-Phoenician inscription in Britain, in recording unequivocally the Aryan character of the Phoenicians, as well as the Phoenician ancestry of the Britons and Scots, merely confirmed the historical results which I had previously. Fig 2 swastika crosses on dress of Phoenician sun priestess carrying sacred fire. From terracotta from Phoenician tomb in Cyprus. After, says Nola, 30. Elicited many years before, from altogether different sources, by discovering new keys to the Phoenician problem. These unlocked the sealed stores of history regarding the origin and activities of the early Phoenicians, and disclosed them to be the leading branch of the Aryan race, and Aryan also in speech and script, and the lineal parents of the Britons, Scots, and Anglo-Saxons. Before proceeding further, therefore, it is desirable to 1. For swastikas on dress of a Hittite high priest, see Fig in Chapter, XXII. 4. Phoenician origin of Britons and Scots. Indicate briefly here what these new keys are, and the manner in which I was led to discover them. In attacking the great unsolved fascinating Aryan problem, the lost origin of our fair, long-headed, civilized ancestors of the Brito-Scandinavian and ancient Greco-Medo-Persian race who gave to Europe and Indo-Persia their Aryan languages and higher civilization, a problem which had so completely baffled all inquiring historians that, after failing to find any traces of them as a race, they threw it up in despair about half a century ago, I took up the problem at its Eastern or Indo-Persian end, and devoted to it most of my spare time during over a quarter of a century spent in India. There were some manifest advantages in attacking the problem from its eastern end. Philologists, ethnologists, and anthropologists were generally agreed that the eastern branch of the ancient ruling Aryan race in India had presumably preserved in the Sanskrit dialect a purer form of the original Aryan speech than was to found in the European dialects, from Greek to Gothic and English, whilst they also preserved a great body of traditional literature regarding the original location, doings, and achievements of the early Aryan which had been lost by the Western or European branch. In the vicissitudes and destructive turmoil of long ages of migration and internecine wars. Besides this, the long prevalence in India of the rigid caste system, by restricting intermarriage between different tribes and the dusky aborigines, was supposed to have preserved the Aryan physical type in the ruling Aryan caste there, in relatively purer form than in Europe. After acquiring a working knowledge of Sanskrit and the vernaculars, and studying the Indian traditions, written and unwritten at first hand, as well as all the reports of the Archaeological Survey Department on excavations, etc., and personally visiting all of the most reputed ancient sites, and making several fresh explorations and excavations at first hand, and measuring the physical types of the people, I eventually found that, despite all that has been written about the vast antiquity of civilization in India, mostly Hittites or Kati, the early Aryans, by theorists who had never visited India, there was absolutely no trace of any civilization, i.e., higher civilization in India before the 7th century BC. Indeed, nothing whatever of traces of civilization, apart from the rude stone circles, has ever been found by the scientifically equipped Indian Archaeological Survey Department, in their more or less exhaustive excavations on the oldest reputed sites down to the virgin soil during over half a century, which can be specifically dated to before 600 BC. On the other hand, I observed, that historical India, like historic Greece, suddenly bursts into view about 609 BC in the pages of Buddhist literature, and in the Mahabharata epic, with a multitude of Aryan rulers speaking the Aryan language, with a fully fledged Aryan civilization, of precisely the same general type which has persisted down to the present day. The question then arose, whence came these Aryan invaders suddenly into India about the 7th century BC, with their fully fledged Aryan civilization, into a land previously uncivilized? On analyzing this early Aryan civilization thus suddenly introduced into India, in regard to its culture, social structure, customs, folklore, and religion, and the traditional topography and climate of its ancestral homeland as described in the Vedas, descriptions wholly inapplicable to India, I was led by numerous clues to trace these Aryan, or as they called themselves Arya, invaders of India back to Asia Minor and Syria Phoenicia. I then observed that the old ruling race of Asia Minor and Syria Phoenicia, from immemorial time, were the great, imperial, highly civilized, ancient people generally known as Hittites, but who called themselves Kati or Kati, which is the self-same title by which the early Briton kings of the pre-Roman period called themselves and their race, and stamped it upon their Briton coins, the so-called Kati coins of early Britain, see Fig. 3, and the early ruling race of Aryans who first civilized India also called themselves Katiyo, as we shall see presently. This ancient Kati or Kati ruling race of Asia. 6. Phoenician origin of Britons and Scots. Minor and Syro-Phoenicia also called themselves Ari with the meaning of noble ones. Now this was the identical racial title which was also applied to themselves by the Indo-Aryans or eastern branch of the Aryans, who called themselves Arya, the Arya of the older Pali, which had also the literal meaning of noble, and which is the actual word from which our modern English term Aryan has been coined. And these ancient Kati or Hittites are represented in their ancient sculptures in Gothic dress. Here then already I seem to have found not only the origin of the Indo-Aryans, but also the original land of the Aryan race, and the homeland of the Goths and of our own ancestral Britons and Anglo-Saxons. And further examination soon confirmed this. Fig. 3. Kati Briton coins of pre-Roman Britain of about 2nd century BC with sun symbols. After Pest. Note the crosses around sun horse, and in second coin contraction of title into ATT. The L between the face and back of coin equals electrum alloy of gold of which coin consists, and A equals ARM or gold. The civilization of this Ari, or Aryan, race of Kati or Kati was essentially of the kind which is now called the Aryan type, and of the same type as that introduced into India by the eastern branch of the Aryas or Aryans. In appearance also these Kati, who were called the White Syrians by Strabo, are seen in their own rock sculptures and sculptured monuments of between 3000 and 2000 RC, to be of the Aryan type. They are tall in stature, with conical Phrygian caps and snow boots with turned-up toes, and garbed significantly in what is now commonly called the Gothic style of dress, see Fig. 4, for the reason, as we shall see later, that they were the primitive Goths, and the Goths were typically Aryan in race. 1s 542, 12.3.6, 551-4. Hittites or Kati the early Goths 7. The ruins of their great walled cities, built of Cyclopean masonry and adorned with sculptures and hieroglyphic writing, are found throughout the length and breadth of Asia Minor and extend into Syria Phoenicia, and the country is intersected by their great arterial highways, the so-called royal roads, radiating from their ancient capital at Fig. 4. Iri Kati, Kati, or Hittites in their rock sculptures dating probably before 2000 BC, Altar Peru and Gilan, L. Note Gothic dress and snow boots. The scene is part of a religious procession. Bukhaskoi or Tyria in the heart of Cappadocia, the traditional home of St. George of England, and the country in which St. Andrew, the apostle and patron saint of the Scots, is reported to have travelled in his mission to the 1 pgg, pi. 49 from bas-reliefs in the Lacilli rock chambers below Bukhaskoi or Tyria in Cappadocia. 8th Phoenician origin of Britons and Scots. Scyths or Geti, the Greco-Roman form of the name Goth. The historical significance of this fact will be seen later. These ancient imperial Kati people of Asia Minor and Syria Phoenicia, are the same ruling race which are now generally known as the Hittites. 4. although calling themselves Kati and called also thus by the Babylonians and ancient Egyptians. The Hebrews corrupted the spelling of that name into Hate and Hit in their Old Testament, when referring to them as the ruling race in Phoenicia and Palestine on the arrival of Abraham there, and the translators of our English version of the Hebrew text have further obscured the original form of the name by adding the Latin affix "ite," thus arbitrarily coining the modem term Anvilthitite. The identity of these Katiari, or Anvilthites with the eastern branch of the Aryans who invaded and civilized, by Aryanizing, India, was now made practically certain by my further observation that the latter people also called themselves in their epics by the same title as did the Hittites. They called themselves Katio in their early Pal vernacular, and latterly translatized it by the intrusion of an R into Kshatriya area, in Hindi Khatri area, and these Indian names, Kaitiyo, Kshatriya, have the same radical meaning of cut, or ruler, as the Hittite Kati has. Later I observed that the early Kati or Anvilthites, as well as the Phoenicians, called themselves by an early form of Bharat, i.e. as we shall see the original of Brit or Briton, and that they also used that form itself, see Fig 5 and later, and that their language was essentially Aryan in its roots and structure. This practically established the identity of the Kati or Hittites with the Indo-Aryans, and disclosed Cappadocia in Asia Minor as the lost cradle land of the Aryans. This now led to my discovery of the key, or rather the complete bunch of keys to the lost early history, not only of the Indian branch of the Aryan and its parent Aryan stock back to the rise of the Aryan race, but also to the lost history of the Kati or Hittites themselves, who have 1 BLS Nover 594 2 also spelt Xatria, and Hittite is also spelt Xalii. Kati or Hittites, the early Britons, hitherto been known no earlier than about 2000 BC or still later. 2. I had long observed that amongst the most cherished ancestral possessions which the Indian branch of the Katiyo Bharats had brought with them from their old homeland to their new colony in India, like Jayanias in his exile jealously bringing with him his rescued household gods from his old Trojan homeland, 3 were their treasured traditional lists of their ancestral Aryan kings, extending back continuously to the first Aryan dynasty in prehistoric times. Fig 5 Phoenician coin of Carthage inscribed Bharat. After Durahist, Oma Ne. Note the winged sun horse, Asva of the Kati Britain coins, and on obverse. The head Ol Barati or U Britannia. See later. Those treasured ancestral Aryan king lists they embedded in their great epic the Mahai Bhairata in summary, but in their older epics, the Purana, they religiously preserved them in full detail. There they cover many hundreds of pages, recording in full detail the main line and numerous branch line dynasties from the commencement of the Aryan period down to historical times, and specifying the names and titles of the various kings, reproduced with scrupulous care, and citing in regard to the more famous of them their chief achievements, thus making the record something of a chronicle of the kings as well. These traditional Aryan kings are implicitly believed by all Brahmins and modern Orthodox Hindus to be the genuine lineal ancestors of the present-day ruling Indo-Aryan caste in 1 GLH, 52. 2 SH 16 and HNE 199. A Virgil Eleniadae 382. 10 Phoenician origin of Britons and Scots. India. And often I observed, in my travels through the country, groups of villagers listening with rapt attention and reverence as one of them read out the narrative of great achievements by some of these traditional early Aryan kings, who are confidently believed to be the genuine historical kings of the early Aryans and the ancestors of the purer Aryan ruling princes in India today, some of whom trace their ancestry back to them. But modern Western Vedic scholars, without a single exception as far as I am aware, have summarily rejected all this great body of epic literary historical tradition as mere fabulous fabrications of the Brahmin priests and bards, just as modern writers on British history have arbitrarily rejected the old traditional ancient British chronicles preserved by Geoffrey and Nennius. The excuses offered by Vedic scholars for thus rejecting these ancient epic traditional records are twofold. Firstly, they say that, as these voluminous king lists are not contained in the Vedas, and only a very few of the individual kings therein are mentioned in the Vedas, which books they assume to be the sole source of ancient Aryan tradition, these king lists must be fabulous. In making such an objection, they entirely overlook the patent fact that the Vedas are merely a collection of psalms, and not at all historical in their purpose, so that one would no more expect to find in them systematic lists of kings and dynasties than one would expect to find detailed lists of kings and prophets in the Psalms of David. The second argument of Vedic scholars for rejecting these ancient epic king lists is, as they truly say, that no traces whatever of any of these early Aryan kings can be found in India. But this fact is now disclosed by the new evidence to be owing to the very good reason that none of these early Aryan kings had ever been in India, but were kings of Asia Minor, Phoenicia and Mesopotamia centuries and millenniums before the separation of the eastern branch to India. Picking up these despised traditional epic king lists of the early Aryans, thus contemptuously rejected by Vedic scholars, I compared the names of their later main line. Indo-Aryans were Kati or Hittites too. Dynasties with the names of the later historical Hittite kings of Asia Minor, as known from their own still extant monuments, as well as from the contemporary Babylonian and Assyrian records, and I found that the father of the first historical Aryan king of India, as recorded in the Mahabharata epic and Indian Buddhist history, was the last historical king of the Hittites in Asia Minor, who was killed at Carchemish on the upper Euphrates on the final annexation of that last of the Hittite capitals to Assyria by Sargon XI in 718 BC. And I further found that the predecessors of this Hittite king, as recorded in the cuneiform monuments of Asia Minor and in the Assyrian documents, back for several centuries, were substantially identical with those of the traditional ancestors of this first historical Aryan king of India as found in these Indian epic king lists. 1. Thus the absolute identity of the Indian branch of the Aryans with the Kati or Hittites was established by positive historical proof, and at the same time the Kati or Hittites were disclosed to be Aryans in race, and of the primary Aryan stock, and the truly historical character of the Indian epic king lists was also conclusively established. On further scrutinizing the earlier dynasties of these epic king lists, I observed that several of the leading kings of the earlier Aryan dynasties in these lists bore substantially the same names, with the same records of achievements, and in the same relative chronological order as several of the leading kings of early Mesopotamia, the so-called Sumerians and Akkads, as recorded in their own still extant monuments and in the fragmentary ancient chronicles of that land. Still further, I observed that isolated early kings of Mesopotamia, who are only known to Assyriologists from their stray inscribed monuments as solitary kings of unknown dynasty and unknown origin and race, were mostly recorded in my king lists in their due order and chronological succession in their respective dynasties with full lists of the Aryan kings of these dynasties. 1. Full details, with proofs, in my forthcoming Aryan origins. 12. Phoenician origin of Britons and Scots. Who had preceded and succeeded them. 1. It thus became obvious that these Indian epic king lists supplied the key to the material required for filling up the many great blanks in the early history of ancient Mesopotamia in the dark and prehistoric period there. Not only did these epic king lists lighten up the dark period of early Mesopotamian history, but they shed a similar illuminating light upon the dark period of early Egyptian history and prehistory as well, and disclosed the wholly unsuspected fact that Menes and his pre-dynastic civilizers of early Egypt were also of this race of Kati or Hittite White Syrians or Aryans. The Phoenicians also were now disclosed to be Aryans in race and Kati Ari or Hittite Aryans by these new historical keys thus placed in my hands. This, therefore, corroborated the fact found by anthropologists from the examination of Phoenician tombs that the Phoenicians were a long-headed race, like the Aryans, and of a totally different racial type from the Jews, to whom they have hitherto been affiliated on merely linguistic arguments by Semitists. This Eastern or Indian branch of the Aryans, the Khattayyo-Aryo-Bharats, call themselves in their epic, the Mahabharata, by the joint clan title of Kuru-Panch, Allah, a title which turned out to be the original of Syro-Phoenician. These Kuru and Panch, Allah, are described as the two paramount kindred and confederated clans of the ruling Aryans, and they are repeatedly referred to under this confederate title in the Vedas. Now Kur, I observed, was the ancient Sumerian and Babylonian name for Syria and Asia Minor of the Hittites or White Syrians, and it was thus obviously the original of the Syria of the Greeks, softened into Syria by the Romans. Whilst Panch, Allah, is defined in the Indian epics as meaning the able or accomplished Panch, in complement, it is there explained, to their great ability 1. See previous note. 2 RRE, 387-389. 3 Surya, or Syria, was the name of Cappadocia in the time of Herodotus, I.72 and 76. And the Seleucid dynasty, which inherited Alexander's Eastern Empire, Khalid their Asia Minor Empire, extending from Ephesus on the Aegean to Antioch on the Levant. Syria. On their coins. Compare BHS, 2, IISF, E. Babylon les Rois de Syrie. Phoenicians were Aryan Hittites. Also an outstanding trait of the Phoenicians in the classics of Europe. This disclosed Panch to be the proper name of this ruling Aryan clan, whom I at once recognized as the Phoenikisis, the Fenka or Panig or Panisas seagoing race of the eastern Mediterranean of the ancient Egyptians, one the Phoenikias of the Greeks, and the Phamikias of the Romans. This Panch ruling Aryan clan was celebrated in the Vedas as the most ardent of all devotees of the sun and fire cult associated with worship of the father god Indra, as in the Vedic verses cited in the heading, and we shall see that the Hitto-Phoenicians were especial worshippers of the father god Bel, also called by them Indara, who was of the sun cult, and whose name is recorded in the early Briton monuments to be examined later on. The Panch-Aryan clan was also significantly the foremost seagoing Aryan people of the ancient world in the Vedas, in which most, if not all, of the many Aryan kings, celebrated in the Vedic hymns as having been miraculously rescued from shipwreck by Indra or his angels, were kings of the Panch-Aryan clan, and if a ship of 100 oars is mentioned in connection with them. 2. These Panch-Aryan are also sometimes called Krivi 3 in the Vedas, which word is admitted by Sanskritists to be a variant of Kuru, for which we have seen means if of Kur or if Syria. This confederate Vedic title for them and their kinsmen, the later Syrians, namely if Kuru Panch, Allah, is thus seen to be the equivalent of the later title for these two confederate Aryan ruling clans, the Syrians and Phoenicians, which is referred to in the New Testament as Syro-Phoeniki and Englished into if Syrio-Phoenician. 5. Further, I found that the early Phoenician dynasties in Syrio-Phoenicia or if the land of the Amorites of the Hebrews, as well as in early Mesopotamia on the shores of the Persian Gulf, where Herodotus records that the Phseni 1. See later for the references to these names in Egyptian texts. 2 RVII 6. 5 Numerous Vedic and epic references to these Aryan Panch, or Phoenicians, as the foremost seamen of the ancient world will be found later on.